Welcome, listeners, to something extraordinary. Picture this. You're sitting there right now, perhaps commuting to work, walking your dog, or curled up at home. But what you might not realize is that you are witnessing the culmination of one of the most remarkable evolutionary stories ever told. You are, quite literally, a walking miracle of biological engineering that took millions of years to perfect. Today, we're going on a journey, not through space, but through time. We're going to uncover the hidden secrets of human evolution, from the pudgy babies we once were to the complex, storytelling, color-seeing, temperature-regulating marvels we've become. This is your host, Madison Reed, and welcome to an exciting episode of The Story of Us. Trust me, by the end of this journey, you'll never look at yourself, or your fellow humans, the same way again. Intrigued by the stories of human evolution, how we think, and what truly makes us human? Check out the Skoob app, powered by AI and brought to you by the expert curators on all things insightful in quick, bingeable episodes. Download the app now from the App Store or Play Store and get started today. So buckle up, we're about to discover why humans are the most successful weirdos on the planet. Let's start with something you probably never thought about: baby fat. Yes, that's right. We're beginning our evolutionary tale with the roundest, squishiest members of our species. Because here's the thing that will blow your mind. Human babies are absolutely, ridiculously fat compared to other primates. Picture a baby chimp, lean, wiry, clinging to its mother with surprising strength. Now picture a human baby, round, plump, looking like a tiny sumo wrestler who's been hitting the milk bottle a bit too hard. That human infant is sporting about 15% body fat, while that baby monkey? A measly 3%. But here's where it gets fascinating. This isn't some modern phenomenon caused by McDonald's and processed foods. This is evolution at work, and it's brilliant. You see, our ancestors faced a problem that no other primate had to solve quite like we did. They needed to build and maintain the most energy-hungry organ in the animal kingdom, the human brain. And that brain, even in a tiny infant, is a glutton for energy. Consider this. An infant's brain, despite being only a quarter the size of an adult's, burns through approximately 100 calories daily. That's nearly 60% of the baby's total resting energy. Imagine if your laptop consumed 60% of your house's electricity. You'd probably think something was seriously wrong with it. But for human babies, this is normal. And here's the kicker. During the last trimester of pregnancy, while the fetal brain triples in mass, fat storage increases 100-fold. 100-fold! Evolution essentially turned human fetuses into tiny energy storage warehouses, preparing them for the massive caloric demands of operating a supercomputer brain. This fat obsession doesn't stop at birth either. Human children maintain about 25% body fat throughout childhood, only dropping to 10% in adult males and 15% in adult females. And that's if they're living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, not sitting at desks all day. But why this dramatic difference from other primates? The answer takes us back millions of years, possibly to our early ancestor, Homo erectus. These early humans needed extra fat reserves to fuel their slightly bigger brains and support their incredible migrations on foot across continents. They were essentially the first long-distance travelers, and fat was their fuel tank. This evolutionary drive to crave and stockpile fat served our ancestors incredibly well. When food was plentiful, they could build up reserves like putting money in a bank. When times got tough, and they often did, they had the energy stores to survive. Of course, this same adaptation that saved our ancestors is now the bane of modern existence. That documentary, Super Size Me, perfectly illustrated our predicament. Morgan Spurlock consumed an average of 5,000 calories daily from McDonald's for just 28 days and gained 11 kilograms. Our bodies are still operating on ancient software in a modern world of abundance. But this is just the beginning of our story. The fat storage was just the foundation, the fuel for something much more extraordinary. Now that we understand why humans are the chubby champions of the primate world, let's talk about what all that stored energy is actually powering, the most expensive organ in biological history. When I say expensive, I mean it literally. Your brain, sitting there in your skull right now, weighs only about 2% of your total body weight, but it's consuming a staggering 16% of your body's total energy. To put this in perspective, that's like having a car engine that weighs 40 pounds, but consumes as much fuel as an engine weighing 400 pounds. This is where primates, as a group, did something unprecedented in mammalian evolution. We developed brains that are absolutely massive relative to our body sizes, and nowhere is this more extreme than in humans. While most mammals have a neocortex, that's the brain's outer layer responsible for higher thinking, that accounts for maybe 10% to 40% of their brain volume. In humans, it's a whopping 80%. Think about that for a moment. 4/5 of your brain is dedicated to the highest levels of thinking: sensory perception, motor commands, spatial reasoning, and language. You're basically walking around with a biological supercomputer that would make the most advanced AI researchers weep with envy. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Humans have about 15 billion cortical neurons, more than double what our closest relatives, chimpanzees, possess with their 6 billion. Even massive animals like whales and elephants, with their enormous brains, only have about 10 billion neurons each. But here's the catch. Those animals have much smaller brains relative to their gigantic body sizes. This creates a fascinating paradox. From an evolutionary standpoint, you'd think bigger brains would be an obvious advantage. Who wouldn't want to be smarter? But evolution doesn't work that way. Every advantage comes with a cost, and the cost of brain tissue is astronomical. Brain tissue demands 20 times more energy than an equivalent mass of muscle tissue. 20 times. That's why, throughout most of evolutionary history, nature has generally favored brawn over brains. Why waste precious calories on thinking when you could use them for running, fighting, or reproducing? There's actually a rather humorous example of this in nature. Certain species of sea slugs. When they're young, these creatures have tiny brains that help them search for a good place to settle down. But once they find their perfect spot and don't need to move around anymore, they literally eat their own brains. Evolution decided that once the brain wasn't needed, it was just an expensive luxury consuming valuable resources. Now, before you start making jokes about tenured academics, remember that this strategy actually makes perfect sense from an energy conservation standpoint. If you're not going to use it, why maintain it? But primates, and especially humans, made a different evolutionary bet. We decided that the massive energy cost of maintaining enormous brains was worth it. And to understand why, we need to look at what these energy-guzzling brains were actually buying us. So why did our ancestors make this incredibly expensive investment in brain power? The answer might surprise you. It wasn't to solve complex mathematical equations or build rockets. It was to navigate something far more challenging and important for survival: other people. This is where we encounter one of the most elegant theories in evolutionary biology, the social brain hypothesis. Essentially, our ancestors evolved large brains not to understand the physical world better, but to understand each other. Think about the complexity of human social interactions for a moment. Right now, you probably know hundreds of people, each with their own personalities, quirks, alliances, and grudges. You remember who owes you favors and to whom you owe debts. You can predict how different people will react in various situations. You understand subtle social cues, hidden meanings, and unspoken rules. This isn't just impressive, it's computationally staggering. Managing complex social relationships requires continuous monitoring, analysis, and response to constantly shifting dynamics within groups. You need to understand who is friend or foe, who can be trusted, who might betray you, and how to navigate the intricate web of social obligations and expectations. But here's the really fascinating part. Primate societies show a direct correlation between group size and brain size. The larger the social group a primate species typically lives in, the larger their brains tend to be. It's as if evolution was saying, if you want to live in a bigger, safer group, you're going to have to pay the brain tax. And our ancestors were willing to pay that tax because the benefits were enormous. In the expanding grasslands and open spaces where early humans evolved, living in larger groups meant better protection from predators, more effective hunting, improved child rearing, and greater survival odds overall. But to live successfully in these complex social environments, our ancestors had to develop something truly remarkable: the ability to understand that other people have minds, thoughts, and feelings different from their own. This capacity, what scientists call theory of mind, is central to human consciousness and gives us deep insights into our own minds. Observing primate societies reveals a harsh truth. Those individuals who couldn't accurately interpret social cues and relationships found their access to resources compromised, their safety threatened, and their ability to reproduce diminished. Social intelligence wasn't just nice to have, it was a matter of life and death. This is why the development of sociability, cooperation, and cognitive abilities went hand in hand throughout primate evolution. Our brains didn't just get bigger randomly, they got bigger specifically to handle the computational demands of living in complex social groups. But the social brain hypothesis, while elegant, doesn't tell the whole story. Because there's something puzzling about it. Why were these cognitive enhancements exclusive to great apes and not seen in monkeys or other mammals? And why do orangutans, who are actually quite solitary and rarely socialize, exhibit intelligence at such a high level? This is where our story takes an unexpected turn, involving tree branches, biomechanics, and one of the most overlooked aspects of ape evolution. Sometimes the most profound insights come from the most unexpected places. In this case, it came from a young researcher studying tree buttresses in the forests of Borneo, who stumbled upon a revolutionary theory about ape intelligence that had nothing to do with fruit finding or social dynamics. Picture this scene. The researcher is there to study why tropical rainforest trees develop those massive, plate-like buttresses that connect their trunks to their roots. But at the same research center, British scientists are studying orangutans, trying to understand why these magnificent creatures have such large brains. The prevailing theory was that orangutans evolved superior brain power to better navigate and predict fruit ripening cycles across the forest. But our researcher, coming from a background in biomechanics rather than primatology, saw something everyone else had missed. The major physical difference between monkeys and great apes wasn't just the absence of tails, it was size. Great apes are significantly larger and heavier than monkeys, and this seemingly obvious fact had profound implications that no one had considered. Here's the breakthrough insight. Navigating the forest canopy is fundamentally different when you're large and heavy compared to when you're small and light. For a small monkey, jumping from branch to branch is relatively straightforward. The branches can easily support their weight, and even if they fall, the consequences are minimal. Remember Haldane's essay on being the right size, which points out that a mouse can fall from any height and walk away unharmed, while a horse would be killed by the same fall. But for large apes, every movement through the canopy becomes a complex engineering problem. They need to constantly assess whether branches can support their weight, how far they can safely reach, which route will get them where they need to go without ending up as a pancake on the forest floor. Each decision requires understanding the mechanical properties of wood, predicting how branches will bend and potentially break, and maintaining a clear mental model of their own body weight and its impact on their environment. This led to what became known as the clambering hypothesis, the idea that great apes evolved larger brains, not for social reasons or fruit finding, but to safely navigate their arboreal environment while being large enough to break the very branches they depended on. And the evidence is compelling. Watch an orangutan move through the trees. It's poetry in motion, but incredibly slow and deliberate poetry. They cling to multiple branches simultaneously with their long, powerful limbs, carefully testing each support before committing their full weight. They're not just moving through the forest. They're conducting a real-time structural engineering analysis with every step. Field researchers have since confirmed that orangutans, in particular, demonstrate remarkable understanding of tree mechanics. They can predict which branches will support them, how far they can bend before breaking, and how to distribute their weight effectively across multiple supports. It's biomechanical intelligence of the highest order. This hypothesis elegantly explains why orangutans, despite being relatively solitary, are so intelligent. It also explains why the cognitive enhancements were specific to great apes. They were the only primates large enough to face this particular mechanical challenge in the canopy. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. This mechanical intelligence, this ability to understand cause and effect in the physical world, may have been the foundation for all other types of intelligence that followed. The neural circuits that evolved to help apes understand, if I put my weight here, this branch will break, could later be repurposed for understanding, if I do this, that person will react this way. Or, if I combine these materials, I can make a tool. In other words, the clambering hypothesis suggests that our remarkable intelligence, our ability to plan, to understand cause and effect, to model complex systems in our minds, all of it may have started with the simple need to avoid falling out of trees. While our ancestors were busy evolving bigger brains and better social skills, they also had to solve another crucial problem: staying alive in a world where the difference between life and death could be measured in just a few degrees. This brings us to one of the most underappreciated aspects of human evolution: our incredible ability to regulate body temperature. And to understand why this matters, we need to talk about something called the surface law, a fundamental principle that governs much more of our lives than you might imagine. The surface law states that as the volume of an object increases, its relative surface area decreases. Think of a balloon. When it's deflated, it's mostly rubber with a tiny pocket of air. But as you inflate it, the air comes to dominate the interior volume, while the rubber remains confined to the surface. The bigger the balloon gets, the more the air inside defines the whole object. This principle has profound consequences for how living creatures manage heat. Heat is lost through an object's surface, so the larger your surface area relative to your volume, the more energy you need to maintain a warm temperature. This is why small animals have such dramatically different lifestyles from large ones. Consider the extraordinary life of a mouse. That tiny creature's heart beats an astounding 600 times per minute. That's a heartbeat every tenth of a second. It must consume 50% of its body weight daily just to fuel its incredibly high metabolism. Compare that to an elephant, whose heart beats only about 30 times per minute, or humans at 60 beats per minute. Here's something remarkable. Despite these vast differences in heart rate and metabolism, almost all mammals average around 800 million heartbeats over their lifetimes, if they live a natural lifespan. It's as if evolution gives each species a fixed number of heartbeats and lets them spend them fast or slow. Humans, however, are the fascinating exception. We blast through that 800 million heartbeat mark by around age 25, then proceed to rack up about 1.6 billion more over the next 50 years or so. This exceptional longevity isn't due to some innate superiority. It's primarily the result of advances in health and living conditions over the past 10 to 12 generations. But back to temperature regulation. We humans live within an incredibly narrow margin of thermal tolerance. Although our body temperature fluctuates slightly throughout the day, lowest in the morning, highest in late afternoon, it typically stays within a degree of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. A deviation of just a few degrees in either direction can trigger a critical condition, potentially causing irreversible damage or death. To prevent such catastrophes, our brains employ a sophisticated regulatory command center called the hypothalamus. This remarkable control center orchestrates our body's response to temperature changes, instructing us to sweat when we're too hot, causing us to shiver when we're too cold, and redirecting blood flow from our skin to vital organs when necessary. The efficiency of this system is truly astounding. In a fascinating experiment, a British researcher had someone run a marathon on a treadmill while varying the room temperature from negative 49 degrees Fahrenheit to 131 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a range of 180 degrees. Despite this extreme variation, and the subject's intense physical exertion, their core body temperature deviated by less than a single degree throughout the entire exercise. This echoes an experiment conducted over 200 years ago by Charles Blagden for the Royal Society in London, who built a walk-in oven to test human resistance to extreme heat and discovered that perspiration is absolutely central to cooling the human body. Our temperature regulation is so precise that even fever, when our body temperature rises above normal, remains somewhat mysterious to scientists. We still don't know whether fever is a defense mechanism against pathogens or simply a secondary response to the body's efforts to fight infection. This uncertainty is significant because it affects whether we should treat fevers or let them run their course. Interestingly, even a slight increase in body temperature can significantly slow the replication rates of many pathogens. But permanently elevating our body temperature isn't viable due to the steep increase in energy costs that would be required. Our normal body temperature represents a carefully balanced compromise between defensive benefits and energy expenditure. There's also a persistent myth that most body heat is lost through the head, but this is largely inaccurate. Your head comprises only about 2% of your body's surface area and is usually well insulated by hair, making it a relatively poor heat radiator. However, you should still heed parental advice about wearing hats in cold weather. Every bit of insulation helps minimize exposure and heat loss. The precision of human temperature regulation becomes even more impressive when you consider that we're essentially warm-blooded furnaces in a cold universe. A typical mammal expends about 30 times more energy daily than a typical reptile, meaning a mammal's daily food intake equals a crocodile's monthly meals. This higher energy consumption gives us flexibility and responsiveness, allowing us to function regardless of environmental temperature, whether at night or in cold weather. But this metabolic intensity comes with costs. We're living on a constant energy tightrope, maintaining the delicate balance between generating enough heat to keep our massive brains functioning while not burning so much energy that we starve. It's yet another example of the extraordinary evolutionary engineering that makes human existence possible. As our ancestors were mastering the arts of social cooperation, temperature regulation, and tree navigation, something else remarkable was happening in their DNA, something that would eventually allow them to see the world in ways their predecessors never could. This brings us to one of the most beautiful examples of evolutionary innovation, the development of color vision. And like many aspects of human evolution, it's a story that begins with genetic accidents that turned out to be spectacular successes. Our genomes are dynamic landscapes where crucial evolutionary processes constantly occur. Understanding how our DNA gradually modifies itself illuminates fascinating insights into our genetic evolution. These changes often appear subtle and insignificant, yet closer inspection reveals extraordinary phenomena. Consider how humans perceive color. Our sight is trichromatic, meaning we can distinguish three primary colors. This ability depends on specialized photoreceptor cells in our eyes designed to capture photons of light. These receptors fall into two categories: rods and cones. Rods operate particularly well in low light conditions and are concentrated around the edges of the retina. This is why you can detect movement in your peripheral vision, even when you can't see color clearly. You can demonstrate this right now. Extend your hand to your side while looking straight ahead. You'll notice the movement without being able to discern the color of your hand. Cones, on the other hand, reside centrally in the retina, providing us with clear color vision directly in front of our eyes. There are three types of cone cells, each calibrated to respond to specific light wavelengths. Broadly speaking, they correspond to short, medium, and long wavelengths, or blue, green, and red. Here's where the story gets fascinating. The difference between each type of cone hinges on a single protein called an opsin. As light passes through your eye, traveling through the cornea, lens, aqueous humor, vitreous humor, layers of brain cells, nerves, and blood vessels, it finally reaches these opsin molecules at the tips of the cones at the back of your eye. When photons are captured by opsin molecules, they cause the molecules to shift shape and initiate an electrical impulse. This signal shoots through the photoreceptor, through multiple layers of nerve cells, clustering into the optic nerve, and finally reaching our visual cortex, granting us sight. Most mammals have only two cone opsins, giving them less sophisticated color vision than humans. Apes and Old World monkeys native to Asia and Africa share our trichromatic vision. But there are fascinating exceptions. Mantis shrimps possess a plethora of opsins, giving them the ability to see a multitude of colors, polarized light, ultraviolet radiation, and essentially lights that are completely invisible to us. The mutations that granted us, and shrimps, multiple color vision weren't simple alterations of single genetic letters, which is the norm for most genetic changes. Instead, they resulted from large-scale duplications of substantial DNA sections followed by subsequent copying errors. Our color vision genetics reveal an interesting pattern. The gene for shortwave opsin sits on chromosome 7, while medium and long-wave opsins are located on the X chromosome. This explains why men are more susceptible to color blindness than women. Women have a second X chromosome as backup if one carries a faulty opsin gene. Men don't have this genetic insurance policy. The duplications on the X chromosome during early primate evolution allowed opsins to mutate without risk of losing function entirely, ultimately granting our ancestors new color sensitivity. And here's something remarkable. A similar process may be unfolding right now, at least among half of humanity. There are women who are likely tetrachromats. They've acquired a fourth opsin on one of their X chromosomes through random duplications. Some estimates suggest that 1 in 8 women may have this extra gene variant, though it's uncertain whether this actually confers tetrachromatic vision. The women proven to have this condition can perceive subtle color differences in areas where the rest of us see uniform color. The evolution of our trichromatic vision likely provided our primate ancestors with advantages in distinguishing red berries and fruits against green forest canopy backgrounds. The potential advantage of tetrachromacy is intriguing but uncertain. While several animal species possess more than 3 types of color vision, tetrachromacy among humans likely arose recently and randomly, with neutral selection pressure. This condition poses no problems and simply adds to our incredible human variation. It's unlikely that tetrachromacy will become widespread in the population, but evolutionary timescales are long, and 5,000 years could bring surprising changes. Most genetic mutations are actually mundane and insignificant, but they're essential for evolution to continue. DNA replication is inherently imperfect, despite abundant corrective mechanisms within our cells. Without ever-present mutations, evolution would come to a standstill because there would be no variation for natural selection to work with. Each individual accumulates approximately 100 unique mutations purely by chance. If you have children, you'll likely pass these unique traits to your offspring, who will acquire their own share of mutations. As long as humans continue to reproduce, we're continuously evolving, and avoiding these evolutionary mechanisms is as impossible as controlling the weather. Recent scientific advancements have revealed just how rapidly human evolution is proceeding. A 2013 study by researchers at the University of Washington examined the genomes of 6,500 people and identified 1.15 million single nucleotide polymorphisms, genetic variations among individuals. Factoring in exponential population growth since humans began farming, they discovered that 3/4 of detected genetic differences have arisen within just the past 5,000 years. Even more striking, 164,688 of these genetic alterations probably resulted in less efficient or dysfunctional proteins, and 86% of these also emerged within the last 5,000 years. We are not a species characterized by genetic perfection, but rather one defined and enriched by our genomic variations and the inevitable mutations they bring. Now we come to perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of human evolution, and I use that phrase quite literally. Recent scientific discoveries have fundamentally challenged one of our most basic assumptions about ourselves. the idea that each of us possesses a single, unified consciousness. This revelation has profound implications, not just for how we understand ourselves, but for entire philosophical and political systems built on the concept of individual autonomy and free will. Prepare to have your sense of self turned upside down. For centuries, liberal thought has postulated that each of us possesses a coherent, unified self. Despite the 37 trillion cells that comprise our bodies and the countless transformations our minds and bodies undergo daily, liberalism assumes that if we look inward with sufficient introspection and self-awareness, we'll discover a single, clear, authentic voice, our true self, which serves as the nexus of all meaning and authority in our personal universe. According to this belief, each individual should have just one true self. After all, if we had multiple authentic voices, how could we possibly decide which one to listen to when making important life decisions? Voting, shopping, choosing a partner, or any other significant choice. However, recent advances in neuroscience suggest that this image of a single, authentic self is as mythical as the Christian concept of an eternal soul or cultural stories about Santa Claus. Instead of representing a single, harmonious voice, our internal world appears to be composed of multiple, sometimes conflicting voices. This leads to the thesis that humans are dividuals rather than individuals. This startling conclusion emerges from studies of the human brain's architecture. Our brains are divided into two hemispheres connected by a thick neural cable. Each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. The right hemisphere directs the left side, and vice versa. This is why stroke victims who suffer damage to one hemisphere often experience problems with one side of their body. Beyond physical control, each hemisphere has specific cognitive abilities and emotional characteristics, though the division isn't entirely clear-cut. For most cognitive tasks, both hemispheres participate, though not equally. The left hemisphere tends to dominate speech and logical reasoning, while the right hemisphere commonly handles spatial information processing. Our deepest insights into this brain structure come from studies of epilepsy patients. When an epileptic seizure begins in one part of the brain, it can quickly spread, causing loss of bodily control and severe life disruption. In extreme cases, mid-20th century physicians would sometimes sever the neural connection between hemispheres as a last resort. This prevented electrical storms from spreading from one hemisphere to the other, effectively isolating them. This radical treatment provided brain scientists with an unprecedented opportunity to study what happens when the two halves of the brain can't communicate with each other. Nobel laureate Roger Wolcott Sperry and his student Michael S. Gazzaniga conducted some of the most revealing studies. In one investigation, they asked a teenager what he wanted to be when he grew up. His left hemisphere, responsible for logic and speech, responded that he wanted to become a draftsman. However, when the same question was posed to his nonverbal right hemisphere using Scrabble tiles, it spelled out automobile race, revealing a completely different aspiration. Similar conflicts were observed in a World War II veteran known as WJ. With each hemisphere unable to communicate with the other, his hands, controlled separately by each hemisphere, would sometimes work at cross purposes, with his right hand reaching to open a door, while his left hand simultaneously tried to close it. In another experiment, Gazzaniga's team simultaneously showed different images, a chicken claw and a snowy landscape, to a patient's separate hemispheres. The verbal left hemisphere identified the chicken claw. When shown cards with related images and asked to select matches, the patient's right hand pointed to a chicken, while his left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, indicated a snow shovel. When asked to explain these choices, the left hemisphere, unaware of the snowy image seen by the right hemisphere, invented a logical explanation. The chicken claw goes with the chicken, and you need a shovel to clean the chicken shed. This interpreter behavior of the left hemisphere was observed repeatedly. The left hemisphere consistently used partial clues to construct plausible narratives, even when it lacked complete information. In another experiment, When the right hemisphere witnessed a pornographic image, the patient blushed and laughed but couldn't verbally explain why. The left hemisphere, scrambling to fashion a believable explanation, claimed there was a funny-looking machine in the room. This research reveals that what we consider our internal voice, our sense of a unified self-making rational decisions, is actually just our left hemisphere's interpretation of incomplete information. We're essentially internal storytellers, constantly creating narratives to explain our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, even when we don't have access to all the relevant information. The implications are staggering. If our sense of unified selfhood is actually an illusion created by our brain's left hemisphere, then fundamental concepts like individual autonomy, personal responsibility, and free will need to be reconsidered. We're not individuals in the traditional sense, but rather dividuals, collections of different neural systems that sometimes agree, sometimes conflict, and sometimes operate independently. This doesn't mean we're broken or dysfunctional. Rather, it suggests that the human mind is more complex, more nuanced, and more fascinating than we ever imagined. We're not simple, unified entities making rational decisions based on complete information. We're sophisticated biological systems with multiple processing centers, each contributing to our overall experience of consciousness. Understanding this dividual nature of human consciousness helps explain so many puzzling aspects of human behavior. Why we sometimes act against our own stated interests, why we can hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously, why we often don't know why we do what we do, and why our explanations for our own behavior are frequently post hoc rationalizations rather than actual causes. As we near the end of our evolutionary journey, we arrive at perhaps the most consequential chapter yet, the present moment, where humans are beginning to take direct control of the very biological processes that created us. Today, we stand at the threshold of a new kind of evolution, not one driven by random mutations and natural selection over millennia, but one directed by human intention and scientific intervention over decades or even years. We're witnessing the emergence of what might be called the Biochemical Revolution. In the realm of science, there's growing consensus that our level of happiness is predominantly governed by our body's biochemical operations. If this supposition proves correct, then the most effective path to sustained contentment isn't through economic growth, social reform, or political revolutions, but through intelligent manipulation of the biochemical systems that constitute human beings. This manipulation is already well underway, with dramatic progress observed in recent decades. Not long ago, perhaps 50 years, psychiatric drugs were stigmatized and misunderstood. Today, that stigma has largely dissolved. A growing portion of the population now takes psychiatric drugs regularly, treating not only severe mental health disorders, but also milder depression and mood fluctuations. Consider the rise of stimulant drugs like Ritalin in the student population. In 2011, ADHD medications were being administered to 3.5 million American children. In the UK, the numbers show an even more dramatic trend. Children taking ADHD medication soared from 92,000 in 1997 to 786,000 in 2012. Originally intended to treat attention disorders, these medications are now consumed by children with no diagnosed health issues simply to improve academic performance and meet intensifying educational demands. This trend sparks heated debate. Critics argue that instead of medicating children to cope with advanced curricula, overcrowded classrooms, and the pressures of contemporary life, we should reform the educational system itself. The fundamental question becomes, do we medicate the children or do we change the schools? Historically, the answer was always to change the schools, but today we're increasingly choosing to alter the children's biochemistry instead. A similar pattern emerges in military contexts. Significant percentages of American soldiers deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan relied on sleeping pills or antidepressants to navigate warfare stresses, 12% and 17%, respectively. The fear, depression, and trauma these soldiers experienced didn't stem from external circumstances alone, but from the hormones, neurotransmitters, and neural networks that processed those circumstances. Two soldiers might face identical situations, but one deteriorates under stress while another thrives. The crucial difference often lies not in the external circumstances, but in the soldier's biochemical makeup. Controlling this biochemical foundation could lead to emotionally more resilient soldiers and enhanced military effectiveness. The desire for biochemically enhanced happiness has become the leading cause of crime globally. In 2009, half of U.S. federal prison inmates were incarcerated for drug-related offenses, with similarly high percentages in Italy, the UK, and Australia. Many criminals were under the influence of narcotics when committing their crimes, pursuing temporary confidence, euphoria, or altered states through substances like alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamines, ecstasy, and LSD. For many people, these biochemical shortcuts to happiness seem more straightforward than conventional paths like education, employment, or stable relationships. This constitutes a significant threat to societal stability, prompting nations to engage in constant, often futile battles against substance proliferation. Governments worldwide struggle to regulate this pursuit of biochemical happiness, attempting to distinguish between good and bad drug uses. The general criterion is practical. Biochemical influences that promote political stability, social order, and economic growth are favored, while those that instigate chaos and economic disruption are prohibited. But the challenge extends far beyond recreational drugs. Research laboratories worldwide are developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for manipulating human biochemistry, including electrical brain stimulation, magnetic intervention, and genetic modification of our biological blueprints. As we develop more powerful tools for biochemical manipulation, we're essentially approaching the ability to redesign human nature itself. This represents a continuation of evolution by other means, not the slow, random process of natural selection, but rapid, intentional modification of our biological foundations. The implications are staggering. If we can effectively control the biochemical basis of happiness, motivation, fear, aggression, and other fundamental human experiences, we're potentially creating new forms of human existence. We might eliminate depression, anxiety, and other forms of psychological suffering. We might enhance cognitive abilities, extend healthy lifespans, or modify personality traits. But with these possibilities come unprecedented questions. Who decides what modifications are beneficial? How do we ensure that biochemical enhancements don't create new forms of inequality? What happens to human authenticity when our emotions and thoughts can be chemically optimized? Are we improving the human condition, or are we creating something that's no longer recognizably human? We're essentially conducting a massive experiment on our own species, with outcomes that remain uncertain and potentially irreversible. Unlike previous evolutionary changes that occurred over thousands of generations, these biochemical modifications can happen within single lifetimes, giving us little time to understand their full consequences. And so, dear listeners, we come full circle to where we began. The recognition that humans are the most successful storytellers in the history of life on Earth. Remember those abstract constructs we discussed at the beginning? Money, gods, corporations, nations? Over the course of human history, these stories have become increasingly influential, often overshadowing the importance of objective reality and personal emotional experiences. The rivers of the world still flow, and humans are still motivated by hopes and fears. But entities like religions, republics, and multinational corporations have fundamentally changed how we perceive and interact with both the physical world and our inner lives. Now, emerging technologies of the 21st century are enhancing the power of these abstract constructs even further. To predict and understand our future, we must understand how these stories have gained such significant hold over our reality. While humans like to believe they are the drivers of history, it's actually the vast, interconnected web of these collective narratives that truly shapes humanity's progress. The cognitive abilities of individual humans haven't advanced dramatically since the Stone Age. What has grown exponentially more potent is our web of stories, the collective narratives and belief systems we depend upon. These have driven humanity from the Stone Age to the Silicon Age and beyond. This era of cognitive domination began nearly 70,000 years ago with the Cognitive Revolution, enabling our ancestors to introduce concepts that existed solely in their imagination. They created complex webs of fiction that initially operated in relative isolation. One tribe's ancestral spirit beliefs remained unaffected by neighboring tribes, and a seashell could hold immense value in one locality while becoming worthless in an adjacent area. These stories about ancestral spirits and valuable objects gave Homo sapiens a crucial advantage: the ability to cooperate effectively among large groups, something beyond the capabilities of Neanderthals or chimpanzees. Groups could scale to hundreds or even thousands, but until hunting was replaced by agriculture, truly massive cooperation remained impractical. The agricultural revolution, that began around 12,000 years ago, provided resources to strengthen and magnify these cooperative networks. Under farming sustenance, thousands of citizens could survive in crowded cities, and armies could enlist and maintain discipline among thousands of soldiers. But these early networks encountered a processing bottleneck. Human brains, while excellent at developing collective myths and organizing mass cooperation, had data processing limitations. Early farmers found themselves trusting in stories about great gods, building temples, celebrating festivals, offering sacrifices. And remarkably, these ancient gods functioned much like modern corporations, serving as legal entities that could own land, hire employees, pay salaries, and enter into contracts. Just as modern employees work for companies like Google or Microsoft, people in ancient Uruk worked for gods. Temples served multifaceted roles centered around socio-political economic activities, branding everything from buildings to products with divine logos. But as these god corporations accumulated wealth and power, human priests found it increasingly challenging to manage their complex affairs due to cognitive limitations. This bottleneck lasted until Sumerians invented money and writing around 5,000 years ago, enabling mass data processing and bypassing human brain limitations. Today, we're witnessing the next phase of this story revolution. New technologies, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, biochemical manipulation, are creating possibilities that would have seemed like magic to our ancestors. We're not just telling stories about imaginary entities. We're creating technologies that can actually grant godlike powers of creation, destruction, and transformation. We stand at a unique moment in evolutionary history. For the first time since life began on Earth, a species has developed the ability to consciously direct its own evolution. We can manipulate our biochemistry, modify our genetics, enhance our cognitive abilities, and potentially extend our lifespans indefinitely. But with these powers come responsibilities that our evolutionary heritage hasn't prepared us for. We evolved as tribal creatures living in small groups, making decisions based on immediate consequences. Now we're making choices that will affect our entire species for generations to come. The fat babies we discussed at the beginning, their descendants might be genetically optimized for intelligence or longevity. The color vision we evolved over millions of years, future humans might see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. The complex brains that allowed us to cooperate in large groups. Tomorrow's humans might have direct neural interfaces, allowing instantaneous communication and shared consciousness. The stories we tell ourselves about these possibilities will shape what actually happens. If we tell ourselves that genetic enhancement is inherently dangerous, we'll proceed cautiously, perhaps too cautiously, to realize potential benefits. If we tell ourselves that biochemical manipulation is the key to happiness, we might optimize for short-term pleasure while losing something essentially human. The challenge isn't just technological, it's narrative. What stories do we want to tell about human nature, human potential, and human purpose? These stories will determine which technologies we develop, how we regulate them, and what kind of future we create. Throughout this journey, we've seen how evolution shaped us through random mutations, environmental pressures, and natural selection over millions of years. Now, for the first time, we're taking conscious control of that process. We're becoming the authors of our own evolutionary story. The question is, what kind of story do we want to write? We've traveled from pudgy babies storing energy for enormous brains, through the development of color vision and temperature regulation, to the clambering intelligence of tree-dwelling apes, to the divided consciousness of modern humans manipulating their own biochemistry. Each step has been more extraordinary than the last. And the most extraordinary step of all is the one we're taking right now, consciously choosing our path forward as a species. We are no longer just the products of evolution. We are its architects. The story of human evolution isn't ending. It's just beginning its most fascinating chapter yet. And you, dear listener, are not just witnessing this story. You are helping to write it, one choice, one discovery, one day at a time. I'm your host, Madison Reed, and this has been The Story of Us. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the evolutionary chronicles of our species. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube, so you never miss an episode from us. For more podcasts, download Skoob, AI-powered podcast studio with over 1,000 plus insightful chunks to boost your curiosity every step of the way. Remember, you are the culmination of billions of years of evolutionary refinement, and you are the beginning of whatever comes next. The future is unwritten. Let's make it extraordinary.